And so he compromised and went about doing both at the same time. Imagine V is not just another VR system, Taki. These are the prototypes for the ultimate VR experience. You see, up until now, virtual reality setups have been limited to facilitating simulated environments on two sensory levels, sight and sound. But these little marvels of technology go beyond that, simulating reality on all five sensory levels, including smell, touch, and even taste. This is the world's first totally immersive VR experience. At those words, my mind boggled. And as I thought of them, I glanced back at the machine that my dad was claiming could make that fantasy life come true. Really? Because, no offense, but they really don't look that advanced. Wow, Mom. That's because we had to cut some corners in the overall design. I mean, you know how the bean counters can be. They all seem to think that you can create brilliant new innovations without actually spending money. So naturally, Candy and I had to get creative in terms of the resources. Anyway, don't let that first glance fool you. Imagine V is made up of some of the most innovative technology the world has ever seen. The world's most advanced sensory interface, designed to give people a whole new level of VR experience. We're talking about a state-of-the-art work of pure genius. Seriously? I was in awe at this point. All I could do was look at the two machines and consider all the possibilities of such new technology. Which is why we can't afford to let anybody find out about Imagine V and how advanced it is. Exactly! Can you just imagine what would happen if some corporate spy were to learn about what we've managed to cook up? I understand, but Dad, honestly, I wouldn't have told anybody, and neither would Mom. Look, it's not that I don't trust either of you. Well, at least for the most part. I just did my best to look innocent at this point, and probably failed it epically. But this is just so important, and we're so close to completion. We can't take any chances, not when we're this close to our first big presentation, and... Presentation? You mean these VR machines, they're ready? They're up and running everything? That's right. We've already tested Imagine V's sensory interface, and I've even worked up a simple game for it, so... It was at that moment that Dad realized where I was going with this, especially with the way I was turning back towards the VR machines and nearly drooling over them. Oh, now wait just a minute here. Can I just try it, Dad? You just said everything's working, so... Dad immediately held up his hands in protest. Hold it right there. We've only tested the sensory interfaces here. We've gotten them to stimulate senses and tastes and all that, and we managed to get the interface working, but then I could be the first one to try it. Besides, what could go wrong? Dad made a face of disgust at this. The mind boggles. You know, Professor, maybe we should let Taki get Imagine V a try. Candy, whose side are you on anyway? I'm not trying to take sides, Professor, but since Taki and your wife already know about Imagine V, I don't see any harm in letting him give it a try. Besides, maybe once he's experienced the fruits of our labor, he'll really understand just how important it is that we kept it a secret. I wasn't sure why Candy was suddenly coming to my assistance, but to be honest, I really didn't care what she was up to at that point. All I really wanted was to give this new VR system a try. She does have a point, you know. And after all the time you've spent being vague and mysterious about this whole thing, can you really blame your own son for wanting to try it out? But Arj... For a few seconds, Dad glanced back and forth between Mom and I, his mouth opening and closing in many different ways. It was pretty obvious that he was trying to come up with an argument that he could use to dissuade us, or at least get us to stop nagging him. But before long, he groaned in patent dismay. All right, fine, I surrender. I'm waving the white flag here. However, there are conditions. What kind of conditions? First off, you have to swear on your life that you won't tell anybody about this, let alone the fact that Candy and I let you take it on for a joyride. Oh, sure, of course, Dad. I swear. On your life, Taki. I placed both my hands over my heart. I swear, Dad, on my own life, I won't ever tell anybody about Liz, unless you give me the okay. A few seconds passed as Dad considered me, still scowling in a degree of displeasure. I'm going to hold you to that, Taki. Dad paused to glance over at Mom, who nodded reassuringly, right before he issued another sigh. All right, then. My second condition is that since this is going to be our first real test of Imagine V and the game environment I cooked up, we're going to keep it short. 5 minutes. Tops. And don't even think about trying to beg me for more time, because 5 minutes is all I'm willing to give you. Seriously, we shouldn't even be thinking about doing something like this, and if we're caught, both Candy and your old man could get in all sorts of trouble. While I wasn't particularly happy about that restriction, I could still understand the sense behind it, so I nodded. I understand. 5 minutes. I'm good with that. All right, my third and final condition is this. If anything happens, if you feel strange, or something doesn't feel right, tell me and we'll abort immediately. I can understand you being curious, but you're still my son. And the last thing I want is for anything bad to happen to you. And while technically speaking nothing should go wrong, well, there's truth in the old saying, about playing it safe. Alright, fine. Glad to have that out of the way. I then turned to the two Imagine V machines. What could be the future of the gaming world? And while I still appreciate Dad's concern, I didn't share it in the slightest. So, can we get started? Okay. Though I think I should have my head examined for letting you three talk me into this. With that settled, it didn't take long for Dad and Candy to get me hooked up in one of the Imagine V units, and from there, all it took was a few seconds' work to fire up the VR interface. As you may have already guessed, the gloves and boots are key elements in the tactile stimulation and simulation of elements of the system. As Candy spoke, Dad was securing the booties to my feet while I donned the gloves. The cascade system we've developed allows you to experience full body sensations, but given how much mileage the average human being puts on their hands and feet, those elements require, well, special attention. Right, I got it. I was only barely paying attention to Dad and Candy as they went over to the science behind their innovation. All I was concerned about was checking out the future of the gaming world. I was already reaching up to place my hands on the helmet when Dad clasped his hands on my shoulders. Look, Taki, ideally nothing should go wrong, but just in case anything does go wrong, I want to brief you on the proper procedure for disengaging Imagine V. Alright, that makes sense. Nodding in response, Dad grabbed the helmet and held it up to me As you can see, there are two knobs on the side of the helmet. These are the controls for safety disengaging the sensory interface. If anything goes wrong or even feels off in any way, all you have to do is grab both the knobs and turn them backwards a sharp 90 degrees. This will safely disengage the sensory interface before deactivating the system. And even once the game starts, you'll still be able to feel the helmet and use the controls. What would happen if I just yanked the helmet off instead? I don't know. Presumably nothing. But since this is all new technology, you'll have to forgive me if I'm not in the mood to take stupid chances. At least nothing stupider than what I'm already doing. Okay, if anything goes wrong, I twist the knobs back, and everything should shut down. Right, which is exactly what we're going to test before we do anything else. Dad lifted the helmet and placed it upon my head, but before he could get that far, Candy held up her hand. Excuse me, Professor, but before you put the helmet on, there's something I'd like to do. Dad frowned at this, and for that matter, so did I. I hadn't forgotten how Candy had put the moves on me before. But at the same time, I couldn't imagine her pulling something overt here and now, even before she'd waited until Mom and Dad were away from the lab before making her move. Well, okay. What is it? Candy didn't say anything to this. Instead, she stood up straight and looked me in the eye, smiling with the tiniest hint of her previous flirt, just enough to give me a bad feeling. She then wrapped her arms around my frame and pulled herself close. I just registered the familiar warmth of her formidable breasts against my own body, when she planted another of her potent kisses upon my lips, sending my heartbeat Why? What in the... The considerable displeasure in Mom's voice was most likely what prompted Candy to break off the kiss before looking towards her. My way of wishing him luck. It was clear from the scowl my mom now wore that she was not remotely satisfied with this, but Dad, he just chuckled easily. Well, I could certainly think of worse ways of doing that, and goodness knows I never would object to having luck on our side. I might have agreed with Dad on this one, if not for the fact that this confirmed that Candy still had her eyes set on me, and she could do whatever the fuck she wanted me while I'm sitting in this VR system. Knowing that, I would have to deal with that particular predicament sooner or later. I let out a sigh and tried to relax, even as Dad lifted the helmet over my head before slowly, carefully guiding it back into place. A few moments later, my eyes were cut off from the rest of the world. First things first, I'm switching the helmet on. There was a clicking sound, followed shortly by a faint whirring. Hello? A moment later, the blank screen that filled my view erupted in color, before almost instantly resolving into the image of the world around me. Can you see me, Taki? Sure can. Alright, good. Now we're going to run a quick test of the failsafes and basic systems. This isn't like your standard gaming systems after all. The Imagine V is basically interfacing directly with your body. I nodded in understanding, and we spent the next few minutes going all over the systems, with Dad and Candy instructing me on how to turn everything off if something went wrong. Alright then, I suppose that covers everything. Just one more thing, Taki. Once we switch on, Candy and I will be monitoring your vital signs and so on from over there. If anything looks to be slightest bit haywire, I'm pulling the plug, and that will be that. Understood? I understand, Dad. Dad, just one more thing. About the game I'll be playing. How do I play it? What's it like anyway? Oh, this game's very simple, Taki. More of a proof of concept than anything else. And as for how you play... Dad's mouth quirked with mischief. Something I didn't like the look of. I'm sure you can figure it out. So let it be a surprise. Dad... Hey, you're all basically pushing me into this, you giving you a test drive of this thing against my better judgment. At least let me have some fun and have a few surprises for you. Okay, I will. That's the spirit. Dad just smiled in satisfaction right before he and Candy made their way off to the Imagine V platform. Is it Imagine 5 or Imagine V? I'm gonna, whatever. We were using for this. Alright. Then they both took up their stations at nearby computers, clearly to monitor everything and make sure everything went smoothly. Alright, Taki, I'm loading the game program now. Then Dad paused and turned my way, furrowing his brows in a serious manner. And remember, 5 minutes. That's it. 5 minutes. I still wasn't happy about that particular restriction. Still, I expected that those 5 minutes would surely be better than nothing. Ready, Candy? Ready whenever you are, Professor. Nodding, Dad then began rapidly typing on his keyboard. Okay, in that case, game on! An instant later, the screen before my eyes flared brightly, forcing me to close my eyes to avoid being blinded. There was a loud whooshing in my ears, and my entire body seemed to tingle for a few seconds. Where am I? Soon enough, the whooshing and the tingling were gone. And so I cracked open one of my eyes to see if the blinding light still showed. But that was already gone, and as was the lab. And in its place, whoa. Oh, I breathed as I looked about, taking in what my senses perceived. There was no sign of the lab where Dad worked, let alone Dad, Mom, or Candy. In its place, a strange world, completely different from the world I knew. A world that seemed to be composed mainly of blocks. There were plants, to be sure. There were grass rustling, blown by a slight breeze that I could feel against my own skin, carrying with it a sense not unlike honeysuckle. Doesn't Burokku mean block? Is it Japanese? I'm not sure. There were trees. There were bushes. There were all sorts of plants that you'd expect to find out in the woods, as well as the smell of a forest. And those things looked natural enough. But the rest of the environment I was in clearly was not. The ground I stood upon was made completely of blocks. The nearby mountain, also of blocks, and the valley that lay off to the side where I stood, guess what? Even more blocks. It was like someone had taken hundreds and thousands of cube block shapes, colored them in colors of nature, and had proceeded to build everything that was now within view, which, to be honest, was a bit disappointing. This poly count is pretty pathetic. No way this is going to convince anybody there's some place that might actually exist. That was annoying for me. Suspension of disbelief, the ability to lose oneself in the story of the game, was one of the biggest components of any media, whether it be movies, TV, comics, or video games. And the blocky design of this environment failed that in a painfully spectacular way. Spectacular, crap. But even as I was frowning in disappointment, the scent of pine trees found its way to my nostrils. And as I turned my attention to the nearby plants, which I noted had an excellent polygon count, I decided to go up to the nearest tree, pausing to examine it, then held up my hand and noted that my game's avatar hand looked precisely like my own. This prompted me to look down at myself and study my current form. To my surprise, the Imagine V system had managed to replicate me perfectly. Everything from my physical build to my clothes had been replicated, right down to the smallest detail. Now that's pretty cool. With this out of the way, I returned my attention to the nearby tree. Holding out my hand once more, I hesitated just for a moment before placing it square upon the tree's surface. And the instant I did so, I experienced the same exact feel as a genuine pine tree. I could feel residual sap upon my skin, and I could still smell honeysuckle from somewhere, and I could feel the wind blowing gently. This is very cool. The Sentry simulation, it's perfect so far. And with that, I decided that I could forgive my dad for the abysmal polygon count of the terrain. After all, this was still a prototype system I was dealing with. And Dad had made it clear that this game had been created as a proof of concept, that this system could work. So I guess I might as well enjoy this while I can. With that in mind, I step off into the forest, and a most highly rendered and realistic aspect of this game thus far. Pausing to imagine a whole new generation of games with this kind of full sensory experience, games like fighters and RPGs transformed into near reality, I find myself salivating at this prospect. Still, I'm starting to wonder when this game will actually get started. As if in response to my thoughts, a new sound reached my ears. The sound of hurried footsteps crashing down upon the grass. And as I frowned at this, I detected another sound, that of a hurried, frantic breathing. Wondering if it was an enemy for a first encounter or something of that nature, I turned towards the source of the sound and froze in amazement. Hello, beautiful. Run! It was a girl, that much was obvious. A girl that was roughly my age, and she was carrying a crossbow in one hand. She was also garbed in a scantily clad outfit that would have left very little to the imagination under normal circumstances. Not only could I imagine her being able to hide a superb figure like that, even with several layers of clothing, but right now, it looked like her garments had suffered some serious damage in recent times, and were badly tattered, just covering up enough for the girl's frame for modesty's sake. Didn't you hear me? I said run! But I didn't run. Heck, I didn't even move, save for my jaw dropping in surprise. Not only was this girl strikingly real with what had to be an exceptional polygon count and perfect texture mapping to boot, but she was also just plain exquisite. She had a shapely hourglass form, and her every step sent her ample breast jumping up and down and up and down, even as perspiring ran down her perfect figure, as she gasped for breath that caused her chest to heave even more. And even after being subjected to the raw pleasures of the female form by Candy, or maybe even because of my recent experiences, just the sight of her caused my body to suffer a hormonal overload that left me frozen in place. But then I heard something else, something unearthly, something that was just plain wrong. And as the girl rapidly dodged about the trees and closed on my position, I saw what the sound heralded. Before my eyes, a wave of what I could only describe as being liquid darkness flowed over the terrain. What? Ooh, I don't like this. A wave of pure ebon that sank into the blocks that made up the ground, washed over the grass and ran up the trees. A pure darkness that seemed to color the very air, turning it into something cold and heartless as it flowed over everything in sight like a sinister tidal wave. Run! Ooh, this time I was in a better condition to heed the girl's advice. Just as she was dashing past me, I turned on my heel and followed her example, running with all the strength I could muster. I take back what I said before, Dad. This is absolutely amazing. This is fucking incredible.